You've used the term force majeure. Majeure.
Yes. Force majeure.
I think
Yes.
it's must be an Irish expression.
It's officially French for superior force, I believe.
So now this is a term that is used in commercial leases, not in residential leases, I'm guessing. So tell me something about what this term means exactly.
Sure.
And then let's talk about material adverse changes, which is
Yep.
something we saw during the last time downturn. And what's the
Sure.
similarity between these two things?
Yeah. So yeah, it's found in a lot of commercial leases, a lot of other commercial contracts, and it's usually seldom used, right? I mean, what it is if it's a flood, sometimes terrorism strikes, or depending on the drafting, epidemics, pandemics, right? And it is a force that is beyond the control of the parties that causes them not to be able to perform under a contract. Now, typically it's found mainly, again, as you said, in leases, sometimes in purchase and sale agreements, but not as much because they have casualty and condemnation and other provisions that are similar, but again, in that sense, they would cover physical damage to a property, which would excuse a purchase, but usually, right, not something like this, which is there's no physical damage. The property's still there. It's just a big effect on the economy and jobs and people's lives. So that's sort of force majeure. It's there's an event that occurs that is beyond the party's control, the contracting parties, that sort of excuses the performance under the contract.
So whose benefit is that usually oriented to? The tenant or the landlord, or is it somehow reciprocal?
It could be both. Usually it's in favor of the tenant, or a lot of times you'll find it in construction contracts in favor of the party who's doing the development, the contracting, and then paying for it. But it could go both ways, right? I mean, imagine if you are a construction lender, do you want to be continuing to put out draws of construction loans when you don't know what's happening in the market? So it could go both ways, but it is, I think, most typically thought of in the case of like large commercial tenants who have the obligation to pay, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in their lease payments, and suddenly, they're forced to close and they just can't operate.
Okay, so that's yeah. So that is the clause in a contract that attempts to account for these kinds of circumstances.
That's right.
How is it actually being used? Are people saying, well, hey, look, I've got this clause, therefore I am not paying? Or you've alluded to this idea that people are being accommodative of each other because it's such an unusual circumstance.
Yeah.
Are clauses being negotiated specifically as definitive direction for how we're going to resolve this problem?
Well, it depends on the case. It depends on the document. Again, in leases, and it also depends on how the particular clause is drafted. I think when you think of a force majeure clause, a lot of people who, just put them into the contracts and they're boilerplate, they cover, terrorism and floods and hurricanes. Most of them probably are not specifically tailored to pandemics and epidemics, although I can guarantee you that they will be now going forward. But yes, so in particular in leases, as I said, even before this all started, or at the beginning, right, tenants like restaurants and retailers were sending their landlord letters saying, look, we recognize this is nobody's fault, but if we are forced to shut down our operations, we are going to be, calling on this clause, but let's figure out a way to work on this, right? And courts have often said, even if you're going to invoke these clauses, you have to put, people on notice, and you have to attempt to mitigate it. So here, maybe yes, you can do, if you're a restaurant, again, you could do takeout or, make partial rent payments, but if you're forced to shut your doors, there's not a whole lot that you can do unless you're, a specific kind of restaurant and you have a large takeout type, a business or something else. On the purchase side, the purchase and sale side, very much less clear cut. And, we have a lot of buyers who are either trying to get out of their contracts if they're past the contingency period, or maybe trying to get a price reduction or in some way use the concept of force majeure, in that sense. But typically those kinds of agreements don't have force majeure clauses. They have condemnation or casualty. And so we're making, and lawyers like us are making all kinds of creative arguments like this is a temporary taking, but it's harder because, they haven't shut down your multifamily property, let's say. But maybe there are, reps and warranties on how, and this is something that will come up on April 1st as well, deliverables of projections that you have told the buyer. Well, now you're going to really find out if those are, holding true. So if you haven't closed yet, that may be something else. Or
right. And you get one last, you get one last look at the books, 5 days before closing.
Yeah, if you have a well-drafted purchase agreement that says your reps are remade on the closing date, that potentially could be helpful. Or there's often conditions that from the period of the end of the contingency period through closing, the seller has to operate in the normal and ordinary course of business. Well, you probably can't do that anymore. So that's another possibility. But again, this is uncharted waters for everybody, and these are the types of arguments that we're trying to make on behalf of our buyer clients. And of course, sellers are saying, well, no, this property is still available for you to buy. There's no specific force majeure language, so it goes back and forth.